We are fortunate to have someone like Geoff as a member of U3A Helderberg, but even more so that he's a member of this special interest group. I'm looking forward to this presentation, and I'm sure Geoff's presentation will raise and hopefully answer a number of related questions about passwords.
As Johan said, the presentation is Digital Access Control. That was Johan's title. I titled it slightly differently. I entitled it "The Password is Dead, Long Live the Password," because any discussion around accessing online content always incorporates these days something to do with passwords. As much as we'd like to get rid of them, I think we're going to be stuck with them for quite a long time yet. So in this presentation, and by the way, I've got my clock in front of me with the time on it, so there's no way we're going to run overtime today. So I'm keeping a close eye on that. So if I do speed up, if I sound like I'm going faster, that's because I'm very aware of the time. So today we're going to have a look at why we use passwords, the problem with passwords. We're going to talk a little bit about hackers and cybercrime, which is the whole point of using passwords, password best practice, how digital access might look in the future, and a password solution. I'll explain what the solutions are for the situation that we currently have. And then we'll be able to, in that final video afterwards, show you practically how that works. So let me just get rid of my toolbars there. That's better. So in terms of a little bit of context, if I asked you about South Africa in 1994, I don't know about you, but the first thing that springs to my mind is the democratic elections. And you remember the time when we all stood in queues with our ID books, standing in the sun in April, waiting to cast our vote for Mr. Mandela's Rainbow Nation. Well, something that worked out a little better, as it turns out, but also in 1994, was that cell phones became or were introduced into South Africa in 1994. MTN and Vodacom got their licenses in 93 and started operating in 94. And I can't actually remember a time now when we didn't have that. But interestingly, at the same time, oh, and these are some of the nice babies that we used to have in those days. You remember these? You could measure the battery life in days and weeks, not hours and minutes, as we do now. In the same year, the internet started in South Africa. It was the first cables were connected, again, late in 1993. And the first commercial take-up in South Africa was 1994, although many of us really only got internet connection in a couple of years later when it became more popular and a little bit cheaper. And of course, I don't know if you remember this, but one of those iconic sounds, isn't it, from the late 90s there that, told us that we were now connected to the world with a wonderful sound. But all of that led us to the situation where we are now, where the bane of my life over the years has been the increasing number of passwords I have to remember or write down or store somewhere. And the number of times I keep getting them wrong, even though I've recorded them. So I'll turn off my sound. So the question then really is why did we get started with passwords, and how did we get to where we are now with the situation that we have? And it turns out that in technology terms, passwords really only started in 1961. And MIT, and Massachusetts Institute of Technology, was the first place that started to use passwords. And really it was just to allow researchers there to access sections of the database that was relevant to them. So it was very low key. And if you remember, when we did start to use the internet in the late 90s, we probably only had one or two passwords. We had probably one for our email address, We might have had one to log into an internet provider, but otherwise, there were very few websites really of particular interest. There was no smartphones, so no apps. So life was pretty simple then, and it's difficult to remember how it was at those times. And today, pretty much everything we do on the internet requires a password, whether we're streaming music or reading the news or looking for a map or whatever it might be these days. We seem to be, everything seems to need a password today. But then the question really is, why is it that we need passwords for everything? Well, the simple answer is that as time progressed and the internet giants appeared, so your Googles and your Facebooks and your Instagrams and Twitter and so on, it didn't take them long to realize that although they were providing content, nobody's willing to pay for the content, so they were never going to make any money out of it. And what they eventually realized was that we became the product. Our personal information was really the assets that they had. And so it became sensible for them to sort of try to see us as individuals so that they could target us with the things that we're most interested in. And so they started to ask us to create accounts. So we started creating accounts using a username, which more often than not is an email address. And sometimes they ask us for a date of birth or where we live or some other piece of information that for whatever the website deals with or what the app deals with is relevant to them. But of course, we don't give that information up freely. We're not willing to share everything if we don't feel that it's in some way secure. So alongside our username, our email address would be a password. And we think that the password is the thing that protects that information. But what it actually is that the internet company is making sure that when you log in, that it's you, because if it's not you, then the ads that are going to be targeted to you and the tracking that takes place could well be wasted because it might be somebody else that's logging in under your username or your email address. So it makes sense for them, from their perspective, to make sure that the person that's connecting to the service is the right person. So the password becomes useful from that perspective. So, of course, the advent of internet banking and online shopping made the use of passwords a priority as a security measure to avoid real financial loss. As we started transacting online using cards, credit cards, debit cards, and so on, then the chances of loss became much greater. And really, that's where hacking, certainly hacking of personal information, really got started, because for hackers, it became a viable opportunity to actually make some real money. And that's really where the problem started. And to the extent that Bill Gates said, the password is dead. The problem with that is that he said it in 2004. And yet here we are 17 years later, and we're still using passwords. But to be fair, he wasn't alone. IBM in 2011 said that within 5 years, you'll never need a password again. Information security at Google, Heather Adkins, in 2013 said, passwords are done at Google. And Eric Gross, the VP of Security Engineering at Google, also in 2013 stated that passwords are no longer sufficient to keep users safe. And yet, what do we find? If you go to a website like Takealot, for example, it's an email and it's a password, and there's no option for two-factor authentication. There's no way of really keeping your information safe. And it's really only a matter of time before that information is breached and your information gets lost to hackers. So we need to think a little bit about hacking, cybercrime, and how you avoid it. What do you do? What can you do as an individual to make sure that hackers at least have a difficult time finding your information, even if they are successful in getting it? But just making it more difficult for them will help. So there are about 6 ways in which hackers steal your passwords, 6 main ways in which hackers steal your passwords. brute force attacks, dictionary attacks, keyloggers, man-in-the-middle attacks, phishing, an email account, and password resets. We'll just briefly take a look at each one of those so you understand how hackers work, and then we can talk a little bit about how you try to stop them getting your information. So a brute force attack is a fairly well-known type of attack, and essentially all that happens here is that the hacker has some relatively sophisticated software, and what they try to do is they try to guess the password, and it's not massively successful, but it does work in some cases. This is a interesting slide. It comes from howsecureismypassword.net. And it shows you how long it takes a hacker to brute force your password, that is to guess your password. And down the left-hand side, you'll see number of characters. And across the top, the complexity of the website, the complexity of the password that makes up the total password. So you'll see numbers only, lowercase letters, upper and lowercase letters, numbers, upper and lowercase letters, and numbers, upper and lowercase letters, and symbols. So symbols would be your @ signs, exclamation marks, hashtags, so on. So you'll see, if we go on to the left column, the number of characters, you'll see that as you start with 4, 5, 6, 7, you'll see that almost any combination really doesn't take very long at all. And if you only have numbers in it, you can go up to 10 characters, and a hacker can brute force attack instantly. And it's only when you start to get to 10 characters and over on the right-hand side, numbers, upper and lowercase letters, and symbols as a combination in your password, that it starts to get a little bit difficult. So it takes 5 years for a hacker to brute force that. And they're not really going to spend the time on that, I think. And you can see as the number of characters increases in that right-hand column, as the complexity increases, that it takes 400 years, 34,000 years, 2 million years, 200 million years, and so on to brute force your password. So if you visit that link there on the right-hand side, which Johan will share with you afterwards, you put a password in, it'll tell you how secure it is. And the answer would probably be not very, but interesting nonetheless. And in 2012, a hacker developed software that could reputedly make 350 billion guesses per second. And when you think about the capacity of that software to do that, its sophistication, you can see how it would be a bit of a worry. But only about 5% of losses due to cybercrime or due to brute force attacks. So it's very hit and miss. And that's not the major way that we get our personal information hacked. So for the hacker tip number 1, make your passwords long and difficult to guess. And I'll show you some of the more common uses a little later. But making your passwords long and difficult to guess is good from a hacking point of view, but quite bad from a memory point of view, because obviously the longer they are, the more difficult they are to remember. So it's a bit of a pro and con. The second type of attack is called a dictionary attack. And dictionary attacks are in 2 types. This is where the software uses common words from the dictionary, because people tend to use commonly used words and addresses in their passwords. And the software just uses all of those words, just tries all of those words just to see what works. And it uses the variations in those words as well. So for example, if you used a common word, but you replaced a 1 with an exclamation mark, or an A with an @ sign, or an E with a 3, or you stick an hashtag or an exclamation mark to the end of the password, just to try to incorporate a symbol to make it more difficult. The fact that it's a common word or a commonly used word renders that useless, because the software checks against all of those variations as well. And the second type of dictionary attack is most most common and is where most of the money gets lost is that lists of passwords can be purchased on the dark web. And these are passwords that have been stored by a company on the web. And then a hacker has targeted that company's servers and extracted all the login credentials. So that would be email addresses as well as passwords. They then dump that onto the dark web, the internet, and sell it. And there was one breach yesterday of an internet company that is not well known here, so I don't think anybody's involved in that. But I saw a few days ago that something like 3.2 billion passwords had been dumped onto the internet in the last week. So again, it's something that happens quite a lot. This is from a website called avast.com, and they deal with breached websites and allow you to check whether your password's been breached. And they have, if you see that purple circle in the center there, 4,885,153,131 stolen passwords from 23,980 websites. So those are breached websites where the hacker's done what I've just said, that the hacker has targeted the servers of the company and stolen the information from there. So what that tells us is that we can have the most sophisticated password imaginable, but it has to sit somewhere. It's stored somewhere. And because it's stored somewhere, there's a danger that a hacker is going to steal it from there. But most theft happens really because we make it easy, because we use simple passwords, we reuse passwords across multiple sites, and sometimes we give them away. And I'll talk about that in a second. But this is one of the ways that we give it away. These are the most commonly used passwords of 2020, according to NordPass, which is a VPN provider. And you'll see that the most common password is 123456. It's got 2.5 million users. Took less than a second to crack it. And it's been exposed nearly 24 million times. And this is, I took this probably about 2-3 weeks ago, so it's probably a lot more by now. And you'll see that the slightly more complex password, 1234567889, is at number 2, and slightly less than 1 million users exposed nearly 8 million times. But you get the idea that these passwords, picture, password, and the numbers are just not going to be very successful. So numbers 1 and 4, that's the 123456, and password were the most commonly used passwords in 2015, as well as in 2020, which probably tells you something about the average internet user. So for the hacker tip number 2 then is don't use a password more than once and change all your passwords frequently. And when I say frequently, good practice is around every 3 months, simply so that if a hacker breaches a company's servers, they are able to steal that password. If you don't know about that, then the first thing you're going to know is you're going to lose something. So if you keep changing it on a regular basis, at least you can try to limit the loss. The third way that hackers steal your passwords is through something called keyloggers. And a keylogger is a piece of malware software that sits on your computer or your mobile device, and it sends information back to the hacker based on whatever it is that you type into a website or an app. So it effectively, what it's really doing is it's reading your keystrokes before it sends that information back. So how do keyloggers get onto your device? Well, the simple answer is that they get onto your device through infected programs that you download from the internet, infected apps that you get from sometimes the App Store or Google Play. Some of the apps on the App Store and Google Play are there only to plant malware onto your device. They don't actually do anything else. So you need to be really careful about that. And I'll show you one way to help to understand how whether an app is a good app or not a little later on. So for the hacker, tip number 3 will be to use antivirus, anti-malware software, keep it updated and run frequent scans. So you'd run something like Bitdefender or Norton 360, something like that, so that every time you download a program from the internet, it will check that program to make sure there's no malware attached to it before it's installed onto your hard drive. And as long as you've got that, you keep it updated so that it's watching out for up-to-date malware. And then you run frequent scans just in case anything slips through. You run a frequent scan of your hard drive, then hopefully you should avoid this type of attack. The fourth kind of attack is called a man-in-the-middle attack. And a man-in-the-middle attack is where you connect to a public Wi-Fi particularly. So obviously, normally, you'd connect your device using the Wi-Fi to a server, which would be the company that you're connecting with. And what a man-in-the-middle attack does is it actually does that. It becomes the man in the middle. It severs the connection to the server and reroutes the connection through his own or her own device. So they're able to intercept whatever you're communicating to the server and read what it is, and also is able to plant malware onto your device. So not only can they steal information, they can actually plant something onto the device, some software onto the device that will continue to feed them information for as long as you use the device. So the simple foil the hacker tip number 4 here is don't connect to public Wi-Fi unless you use a virtual private network or a VPN. Because what a VPN does is it encrypts the information as it leaves your device and only decrypts it at the server point. So then a man in the middle can't read the data that's being sent from the device to the server directly. Then, of course, phishing, and I'm sure you've come across this before. Phishing is simply where somebody's taking your personal data using things like fake emails. We all get these, but increasingly they look pretty good. So you'll get one from a bank, and some of them really do look like they've come from the bank. Usually the giveaway is to look at the email address that the email came from to see whether it's a correct address. It's a NetBank address or an Absa address and so on. Although that in itself isn't 100% safe, but it certainly helps to rule out some of the more obvious scams, if you like. So fake emails asking you to click on a link because there's something wrong. Usually there's a problem with your account. It's going to expire, or there's some problem, somebody's stealing money from your card or something like this. And they tell you, click on this link and go to your account and put in your password. And of course, that's where the information is stolen. Also, with those programs and apps that I was telling you about, the ones that are downloaded from the App Store or from the internet, they are designed to steal information from your system and send it off to the hacker directly. So for the hacker tip number 5, never click on a link in an email that asks you to sign in using your email address and password. And for the hacker tip number 6, download apps and programs only from reputable sources. Check that there are existing users. So these are 2 apps that are available on the App Store, which I was looking at yesterday. And I just randomly put in traffic as a search term to see what apps were available. And I got these 2. And I just pulled these 2 off my phone yesterday. And you'll see that, they're probably both fine. I don't know. But you'll see that this one, it isn't rated very highly. It's only got 2 stars. It's got 131 reviews. That's not users, that's reviews. But this one is rated much higher. It's 4.3, and it's got 134,000 reviews. Now, if I was looking to download something about traffic, live traffic, obviously the one on the right is the one that would be most valuable. or safest, because it's got more users, it's got more reviews versus the other one. And that other one, the one on the left, the live traffic info, that's been on the App Store for nearly 4 years. And it's only got 131 reviews. So it doesn't have a massive number of users, simply because when they see the 2 stars, they put off by it and they don't use it. There are apps that are designed to take that personal information, as I said before, and they have fake reviews behind them. So when you look at the number of reviews, and they're quite small, if you open the reviews, as you can do, and look at the names and the language and the places that they emanate from, you probably find that the reviews themselves don't look very kosher either. And then finally, another common way of stealing passwords is email account and password resets. So what happens here is that the email account that you use, if it doesn't have a strong password, the hacker breaks into that. So once the hacker's into your password, into your email address, into your email account, and they take control of that, all they're going to do is they're going to change the passwords on some of your key accounts on the internet. So for example, here's the Take-A-Lot sign-in page. So obviously, every time you log in, you're going to use your email address and password. All a hacker is going to do is to click on Forgot Password, change it. As you may know, when you do that, you get an email that tells you how to reset your password. But of course, the hacker, having controlled your email address, will then see that email and then follow the instructions on the email to change the password into something the hacker knows and you don't. So key thing here then for the hacker tip number 7 is make your email secure by using a strong password on your email account combined with a multi-factor authentication app and ideally a biometric ID. So we'll talk a little bit about multi-factor authentication just now, and also a little bit about biometric IDs. So what's the scale of the problem? Cybercrime, according to McAfee, in 2019 cost the world economy $1 trillion, or 1% of global GDP, which is an increase of 50% on the 2018 figure. So it's a significant amount of money. So you'll see that hackers around the world now are incentivized to try to get your personal information because there's a lot of money involved in it. And there are even now states, and people talk about Russia and China, who are trying to get information to snoop and also to steal. Here's a website, a link that, again, Johan will share with you afterwards, and you can check whether your email address and login credentials have been leaked in the past by going to this address, and it will tell you if it's been leaked, and usually from where it was leaked. And you'll be able to then go to that site and either close the account or change your password or whatever it might be. So it's well worth taking a look at that. So let's think about then, if we think about the things we've said about avoiding hacking attacks, so what exactly is best practice? So passwords should contain a minimum of 8 characters. The longer, the better. Remember that table we looked at earlier on. 10 to 12 is probably a better range. Use a combination of capital and lowercase letters, symbols, and numbers. Remember the table on the right-hand side, the right-hand column had a combination of capital, lowercase, symbols, and numbers to make it more difficult to guess. Don't use passwords that are easy to guess. So don't use your names, your addresses, your birth dates, your family's names, all those kind of things. Use phrases that are unusual but easy for you to remember. So a common way these days to think about a password is not to use a word, but a phrase or a sentence, something that's specific to you. So you might say, you might have a password that says, I love living in Helderberg, something similar. You want to put some numbers in it, but it's something that means something to you, not easy to guess by somebody else. The only problem with that, especially if the sentences are quite long, is that you have to keep on retyping them if you don't have a password manager. Don't use the same password across multiple sites and apps, as we've already said. So you've got to use one password per site and change it whenever you go to another site. And then change your passwords frequently, at least once every 3 months, and don't share the password with anyone. If anybody asks you what the password is, if you call a call center, a bank call center or something like that, and they ask you what's the password, you don't share that. Don't share it via an email. Don't send it to anybody by WhatsApp or email. No, keep it to yourself. So I mentioned multi-factor authentication at one point, and sometimes this is called two-factor authentication, which is not ideal, but it's better than nothing. And what this is where you are doing a transaction online. Maybe you're buying something, and you're using a credit card, for example, and then your bank intervenes and says, "Well, we sent you a code to your mobile number. Enter the code on the web page," and then that kind of confirms to them that you have that it's actually you making the transaction, paying the transaction. The problem with that is that we know from our own history in the last 3, 4, 5 years that criminals working with people working in the MTN and Vodacom and Cell C companies have managed to SIM swap and take control of those numbers so that they are able to pretend to still be you. So that's why two-factor authentication isn't ideal, but multi-factor authentication really depends on something you know, and something you know would be a password. Something you have would be a mobile device or a tablet or a phone. And that's where a lot of multi-factor authentication processes stop for some websites. But ideally, you want to incorporate the third thing, which would make it much more secure, which is something you are. And that would incorporate something like a fingerprint, a face print, a facial recognition, a voice print, iris or retina check, something like that's really quite difficult for somebody to copy or to stand in for you. So one of the ways that you can do this is by using an authentication app. And an authentication app, Google has one, some of the password managers have them. And all that is an app that sits on your phone or your tablet. And when you log into the website, it sends a message to the app. So it's not to your SMS, it's to the app. And you can open the app using, if you've got a more modern phone, you could use maybe facial recognition, or you could use fingerprint if it's an older phone. My old iPhone works with a Touch ID fingerprint. So I can open the app with my fingerprint. I don't open it with a code. So what that means then is that I know the password on the website. It sends a message to my cell phone. And when it gets to my cell phone, I open the Authenticator app. I use a fingerprint to open the Authenticator app, and then I approve the transaction there. So it incorporates all three aspects of multi-factor authentication. And you can see that's probably a lot safer than your standard, just an SMS to your phone. Now, for a lot of people, the easiest way to manage their passwords is to let your web browser remember them. If you use Google Chrome, as I do, Chrome is pretty good with that. If you're using a Mac, Safari has a keychain, although that's slightly different to the Chrome model. But in Chrome and no doubt Edge and Firefox and although Bing, whatever it is, would have those. And your web browser will remember your passwords and autofill them for you. So when you go to a website, it will autofill, it'll remember what the password is, and it'll autofill it for you, which is fine as long as nobody ever steals your phone or gets hold of your computer. There are some positives and negatives about that. On the positive side, it's better than nothing, having your passwords remembered. What it also does, though, is that means you can create your own long passwords and not have to remember them. So you could make up these long passwords with the uppercase, lowercase numbers and symbols, and you wouldn't have to remember them because your browser would, Chrome or whatever, would remember them for you. So you can make completely random passwords. The negatives around that is that you can't use different browsers on different devices. So if I was using a Mac, I was using Safari in a Mac, and I was using a PC with Chrome. Chrome might remember the password, but the Safari doesn't. So I can't use those different devices, different browsers on different devices. It's difficult to change browsers because let's say you're using Chrome and it's got all your passwords stored, and then you decide, actually, I'm going to use Firefox instead because I've heard Firefox is better. The problem is now all your passwords are still in Chrome. You've now got to move them across to another browser. Not all browsers generate random passwords, and random passwords are, if you're using something like a password manager, which I'll explain a bit later on, they will generate random passwords of various lengths, of various types, automatically for you. So browsers generally don't do that. They're starting to do that now, some of the newer ones, but generally they don't do that. You have to do that yourself. You have to frequently log out of the browser because if you stay logged in, then your passwords are available to anybody who gets control of your device. And they may not work with third-party apps. So if you've got third-party apps on your phone, and it's not a Google app, for example, then it may not work very well. And you have no option to choose the length and characters. If the browser chooses it for you, you may not be able to choose the length and the characters. So, but again, as I mentioned before, you can do that for yourself if you really wanted to. So if you use Google Chrome, there's a way to have a look to see what passwords it remembers. Now, I did this exercise a couple of months ago, and it told me that in fact I had over 250 stored passwords, which surprised me. And what tends to happen is that, because I use the internet a lot, so that not everybody would have those many, but over the years, every time I visited a website because I wanted to get some information or get an image that I wanted to use in a slide or something like this, I'd have to have an account. They'd ask me to create an account. So I have to put in my email address, give it a password, and then I could get what I wanted from the site. And then I'd forget about it and never go back to that website again because I'd got the information that I wanted. And so this thing would sit there and I would completely not know. So if you open your account, your Google account, and you go to this little icon at the top over here and click on that, and then click on this little lock thing here, that will take you to this page, which is the passwords page. And here you can see that this is the saved passwords down at the bottom here. And this list, which in my case went on for pages, tells you all the websites for which Google Chrome saves your password, all the usernames. I just blanked mine out so that I don't give them away, but your username would be there, which more often than not would be your email address. And then the password in use for each of those is here. And if you click on this little icon here, it would show you what the password is. It would change those dots into letters and numbers, whatever it is. And you can see what is in use. So you can see whether, in fact, you are using the same password in more than one location. And if you click on this little thing over here, it tells you that you can copy the password. It gives you some more details, but you don't really get a lot. But you can remove it from there as well if you wanted to. What I use this for when I did my exercise was to go to these. If I didn't need these accounts anymore, I actually visited the website and I closed the account and deleted the account from their files and just left the ones that I needed. If you while you're on this page, a useful page to look at is this one called Check Passwords. Keep your passwords safe from data breaches and other security issues. And you click on this little arrow over here, and you'll see that it checks the passwords that it's remembering. Not all your passwords, only the ones that it remembers. And it's checked them to see whether they've been compromised in those website breaches that I was telling you about earlier on. And in this case, thankfully, no compromised passwords were found. So that's okay. I click on this little arrow to go back. And the other thing that I might want to think about is whether I want to continue saving the passwords and whether I want Google to automatically sign me in when I visit a website. If you decide to use a different browser, or if you decide to remove all your saved passwords from Google, or if you want to use a password manager, you probably want to turn that off. And turning it off makes it go gray like that. So that it no longer saves your passwords and it no longer autofills for you. And then click on that little arrow to go back, and we're out of that. But it's a useful exercise if you do use Chrome, and I'm sure the other web browsers have a similar options under passwords or login and security, something like that. And your saved passwords might be there. And the problem with saved passwords is if you lose your device and you're still logged into those browsers, someone steals your phone in the mall or whatever, they're still able to get that information. So how might digital access look in the future? Will passwords still be required? So mostly future access is around biometrics, and fingerprint is one of those. And currently fingerprint is used a lot for phone and apps. As I mentioned, my old iPhone has fingerprint opening. It uses passcodes as well, but uses fingerprints. And I must say, given the number of times my phone has to be reopened every time I look at it during the day, using my fingerprint instead of typing in a 6-digit code is just a wonderful thing. But you can also use it to open other apps as well on your phone, so that you can use your fingerprint. So things like PayPal and Dropbox and a few other, my banking app, for example, uses my fingerprint, doesn't use a passcode. And I feel that's a lot more safe. So banking, and of course, home affairs. If you go to the bank these days, they very often have a fingerprint reader on the counter so that you can confirm who you are. And home affairs, when you come in through the airport, there's very often a biometric fingerprint reader on the counter. Sometimes they use it, sometimes they don't. I don't really understand why, but they know what they're doing, I'm sure. The slightly better biometric method, and certainly more popular than fingerprint, is the iris and retina recognition method. The retina recognition is reckoned to be about 20,000 times more accurate than fingerprints, because very few people's retinas will ever change over time. And again, some phones and apps will use retina reading. Border controls are often used. So when you go into Dubai, for example, and when you go to the UK, you look at the screen and stand on the footprints and look at the screen, and they probably using retina recognition to allow you through. And access control into secure areas, very often government facilities, private facilities, high security facilities, use iris and retina recognition. The only drawback with iris recognition is that it's quite slow to take an initial reading, and it's considered a little bit invasive. It gets very close to the eye, takes about 15 seconds to read it, whereas retina recognition is much quicker and can be done from a photograph. And then the thing that seems to be really growing in interest is facial recognition. And I remember, thinking back to the old days of Star Trek when I was a kid growing up, and you'd have these little pads of people walking through sliding doors, and they would have these kind of facial recognition type of dots all over their faces. So more modern phones than mine are using facial recognition. But a lot of apps use it as well now, and there are apps, certainly in the US, I'm not sure that we use them here yet, where you can buy stuff in shops using facial recognition. Airline boarding, apparently airlines are using this on a much more regular basis than anybody else at the moment, so that as you pass through the boarding processes and you're sitting in your seats, they're able to identify who is who. Again, access control into high security areas. Banking in some countries is using facial recognition, and increasingly for public surveillance. And it's that last point, public surveillance, that is causing most concern about using facial recognition, because once you have facial recognition on a system somewhere, it can be used for any number of purposes. And in the US, the FBI is banned from using it because it could be used for the wrong purpose. So in China, for example, there are 170 million surveillance cameras currently in use. And according to The Economist, there will be 400 million additional cameras to be installed within 3 years. And so obviously it's been used to monitor and track the movements of every person, and that's the intention of the Chinese government. And not everybody's very comfortable with that. And certainly in more democratic environments, it's probably going to be even less popular. So that may well inhibit the use of facial recognition going forward. But I think there's certainly going to be times when we don't have very much choice about it, particularly where governments are more interested in being able to track us and follow us than whether we're actually transacting online, for example. A great example of facial recognition, if you use Google Photos, as I do, I store my photos with Google. And if you go to the Google Photos app and you open the app, it'll give you an option to search for photos by person, by place, and by type. But if you click on the one by person, it very cleverly gathers together all the pictures of a person that you have in your folders. And I have several of my wife, as you'd imagine, and I took some old photos and I digitized them. I scanned them and digitized them and then stored them. And I uploaded them to Google Photos. This is some years ago. And Google is able to recognize my wife when she was 25, wearing a hood almost obscuring her face. And they still group it with photographs that I take now when she's 65. So it's incredibly accurate, but a little bit spooky at the same time. And there is an Economist video report. It's a very short, about 10 minutes video on YouTube, which is worth taking a look at, just to understand what facial recognition really is, and really why the Chinese people are pushing back against it. So that said, if we're going to continue to use passwords for a while yet, what's the solution? Well, the solution really is a password manager. And the key ones, the main ones, are LastPass, 1Password, and Dashlane. And I use LastPass. I started using it about 6 months ago. Now, I have to say it's made a huge difference in the way that I interact with the internet. It's a great tool. And there is a free version. So how do password managers work? So your passwords, you can use your own passwords, or you can use passwords that are randomly generated by your password manager, but they're stored in what's called a vault. And you have access to that vault via a website, a browser extension, or an app using a master password. And that master password is the thing that's key here. You decide what your master password is going to be, and it's something that's known only to you. So it's relatively long. It's got a combination of numbers and symbols and what we talked about earlier on, but only you know that. And if you lose that master password, you can't get into the vault. So it's got to be something that you're not likely to forget, but also something that's not too easy and can't easily be guessed or copied. So the passwords are encrypted when you use your computer or your mobile device, they're encrypted at source there before they go to the password manager's servers. So when they sit on the password manager servers, those passwords don't look anything like the actual password. They are encrypted and they are hashed. So they are changed in characters. So anybody breaking into that or getting that password wouldn't help them at all. They would need the security key which sits on your device. So the password managers use a zero knowledge security system. They don't know what your passwords are. So you can't go to them and say, I've lost my password. They just don't, they can't help you. They don't know. They never see what your actual password is. So there are three levels of security. One is called the encryption, which I just explained. Sorry, there's a spelling error there. There's a P in that, encryption. Security key, which sits on your device, and it's the security key that encrypts the information, and then the master password that you use for the site itself or the app. And then you can still add multi-factor authentication into that as well, just to make sure that it's even more secure. So why would you use a password manager? So you've got all your passwords in one place. You only have to remember one password. So it means you don't have to remember multiple, you don't have to write them down. There's an authentication app and a biometric ID available for login, as I explained before. When you log into the password manager to open your vault, it asks you, it has its own app, it asks you if it's you, and you can open that app using your fingerprint or your facial recognition, depending on what your device is able to do. And only when that's done will the vault open and you can use your passwords in your vault. It can generate random passwords for you, various lengths. You can choose which characters and how many characters go into your passwords. You can use the password manager on PCs and mobile devices, and it will sync across multiple devices. So if you're using a mobile phone and a PC, the vault is the same. The passwords are the same. They will synchronize. If you change your password, it'll synchronize to your mobile device and to your PC. And most of them have a facility to store personal documents in e-format in the vault. So if you wanted to scan your will or passports or ID books or that type of information, that can be stored in the password manager's vault. And I just want to finish then with the story of Stephen Thomas and his password. I don't know if you have heard this guy's name. It's come up in the last 2-3 weeks. Stephen Thomas is a German computer programmer. He lives in San Francisco. And in 2011, he was asked to make a video called How Bitcoin Works. And in payment for that, he was given 7,002 Bitcoin for his trouble to settle his account. At the time, Bitcoins were $2, roughly $2. And the 7,002 Bitcoin was worth about 15,000 US dollars. Bitcoin has gone up to over $50,000 in the meantime. Today, that Bitcoin holding of $7,002 is worth $357 million. Now, from 2011, Stephen Thomas left them in his e-wallet. Bitcoin doesn't have a physical existence, so it's always sits in a wallet, in a computer, in a server somewhere, and he accesses it using his username and password. When he got paid it, he ignored it. He put it or left it in the e-wallet and he forgot about it. And only when the price started to rise did he think, oh, actually, I've got some of those, and maybe I should take a look. So it's now worth $357 million, give or take. The problem is that he can't find the piece of paper he wrote the password on. And he's had 8 guesses. He has 2 guesses left because Bitcoin allows 10 guesses in total. And if none of those 10 guesses work, the e-wallet locks up forever. There is no way of ever retrieving those 7,002 Bitcoin. So he had 10 goes. He's used 8. And up to about 10 days ago, he had 2 guesses left. So the world is waiting to find out whether those 2 guesses are going to pay him out. I think it's probably clear that they're not, because he's probably tried everything that he would normally have used. And remember, he created this password in 2011, so it's a long time ago. So he's used his commonly used passwords, the ones that he would possibly think about using, and none of them work. So if he'd used a password manager, or even if he'd used Chrome to remember his password, he'd have been $350 million richer. So everybody's waiting to find out whether Stephen Thomas is going to be a rich man or a sad man.
So let's go to the first question here from Michael Fleming. He's asking, Geoff, policies or policing and penalties of hackers. Is there common knowledge, or what's the how are they policed, and what are the penalties if they catch a hacker?
Very, very few get caught, is the reality. So if they do get caught, the penalties are quite severe, but they tend to be financial. So usually with those kind of things, they've made more money out of it than the fines are. There is jail time as well. But increasingly, hacking is done by organizations and it's not done by individuals as such. So it's quite difficult to identify a person. It's very rarely, I think very rarely these days, that it's just an individual working alone. And sometimes, as I said before, it's states that are actually doing this. So if you think about the Hawaii, who make the routers, the UK is very reluctant to have UI routers in use in the country because they perceive that the information that passes through the router is being fed back to China. So if it's state-sponsored hacking, then of course you've got no chance of getting anywhere with that. So there is a level of penalty, but it's so rare to hear of it that it certainly isn't a deterrent.
I think along the same lines, Angela's asking, is it worthwhile reporting cybercrime? She reported phishing emails, but always wonder, is it just a waste of time, or is it worthwhile to report it?
I think it's worth reporting it. So if it was, for example, I get them from time to time from somebody purporting to be a bank. And so sometimes I think it's worth sharing those back rather than just deleting it, because I think it's useful for the bank to see what type of phishing is going on. I'm sure they would get it from somewhere, but I think it's still quite useful for the bank to understand, what their customers are being exposed to. Of course, you tend to get them from every bank. It's not just your own bank, but when you get them from your own bank, you kind of go, I bank with Nedbank, and here's an email coming from Nedbank asking me to do something. And that's really where the danger lies. But yeah, I've certainly let Nedbank know about those kind of things. Whether anything gets done about it, I really don't know. But I think it's impossible for them to stop it. I think it's just a matter of them warning people of what the phishing emails are about.
I agree with that, and I also had a similar experience from my own bank, and I spoke to the forensic expert at the bank and also asked him this, does it help if we report this? And he said definitely, the more information they get, they can follow up on try and get the IP address or the email address origin, or if it's on a cell phone, and you received an SMS, they can try and follow up on those numbers. So yes, if it's your own bank, I would say definitely report it. Then Louise is asking, and I'm just reading the question as I see it, banks try to force one to download their cell phone apps. They say this results in increased security. When you enter a transaction on your laptop, it needs to be authenticated on your phone. However, if you do the transaction on your phone, it needs to be authenticated on that same phone. So how safe is that if to do transactions on your phone?
Yeah, exactly. So it depends how you open the authenticator. So, so let's say you're using your phone and you're using I assume we're talking, Louise, we're talking about the banking app. So you're logged into the banking app and you do some sort of transaction, and then you're at the point of logging in, they send you a message to the authenticator app, and then it's really a question of how you access that authenticator. So if it opens automatically and all you have to do is tick a green box or something like that, then of course it's no value at all. But so I use LastPass Authenticator for various websites, but I can't open that authenticator without my fingerprint. Okay, so even though it's on the same device, if somebody stole my phone and were trying to log into my banking app, they wouldn't be able to do that because they would need my fingerprint on the authenticator to open the authenticator to say, yes, it's me. Okay, so you've got to think about how do we get into how does the authenticator open? If it just opens automatically, then that's not going to help you at all. So you're quite right. If you lost your phone, that wouldn't really keep you any safer. You've got to make it think about how do we make it difficult to get that authentication message? How difficult could it be for somebody else to get that? But it's a good point. Yeah, you want to use biometrics, so fingerprint or facial recognition that opens that, or retina recognition opens the authentication app, or you have an authenticator on another phone.
Okay, I think well, related to that also, Mike is asking, can I get a fingerprint reader? And I assume, Mike, you mean on your smartphone as an app.
No, I want to put it on my computer at home.
Okay, either on your computer or on your smartphone. So the question is there a fingerprint reader available for a computer or an app on your smartphone to do a fingerprint?
It's a good question. I see no reason that you can't get a reader that's probably just got a USB plug on it. My laptops are, a couple of years old probably, but they don't have any biometrics on there as far as I'm aware. But I have seen them, so you probably can get a USB plug. But it would be a matter of the software reading it. So depends what the software that comes with it would do for you. It's not the machine; it's the software that would read the fingerprint. It's also just worth mentioning while I think about it that when on a phone, if I have on my iPhone, if I use my fingerprint on my iPhone, that fingerprint is not stored anywhere else except on my phone. Right. So a lot of the time, your passwords are stored somewhere else. They're stored on somebody else's server somewhere, which is where they're getting breached from, because you're giving it to somebody else. You're giving them the email address and you're giving them the password, and they are storing it. But with a Touch ID, with a fingerprint ID on a phone, it stays in the phone. It doesn't get stored on a server somewhere else. It's the phone that unlocks to open the various apps. So it's that's a much safer option. I meant to mention that as we were talking. But in terms of a reader, I'm sure you can.
Yeah, I think I can add, if you walk into a Capitec branch, you'll see all the consultants there who are just using a PC. They've got a fingerprint reader connected via a USB slot on their computer. So it's available, but it's up to the software how you actually use it. Okay, then an interesting question from Helga. Why should I care if somebody has my password, for example, at Takealot? What can they really do with it?
Well, it depends how good your password is.
But what can they do if they've got it? Why should I care that no one can get my password at a site, for instance, like Takealot? I can understand from the bank, but if if you steal my Takealot password, what can you do with it?
Okay, so with any of these online shopping sites, you know, they very often store your credit card details under your account. So if I can access your account, I go to the payment methods, I probably find your credit card information. I can change the address. I can order a whole load of stuff to a different address, or I'd have it delivered to a pickup point down here, and I'd go there and pick it up the next day and not have it delivered to my physical address. I'd take that password and I'd try, I know your email address, I'd take that password and I'd try it on 1,000 other websites to see if that would work and do the same thing. So again, it comes back to whether that has been reused or not. Sorry, sorry, Johan, just before you go, there is a fingerprint reader available, and it's called an add-on fingerprint reader. You just read it, plug it in, and laptopdirect.co.za has one for sale. So you can get them, yeah.